Hey guys, tonight we're heading back 1,000 years into sagas whispered in smoky halls and half-frozen voyages across waters you probably wouldn't dare to dip a toe in. Imagine the North Atlantic, dark, steel-colored waves slapping against creaking wooden hulls. Icy wind cutting your cheeks raw, and no GPS to tell you if you've wandered too far west into the endless blue. You probably won't survive this trip, most wouldn't, but you're just tucked in bed. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me your location and local time in the comments so I know just how far this little bedtime voyage is reaching across the map. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease tonight's journey together. You in Greenland, or at least what passes for it, in the year 985. Jagged mountains bite the sky, glaciers loom in the distance, and settlements cling to narrow fjords like stubborn weeds growing out of rock. Stories float through the smoky longhouses about lands beyond the ice. Some say they are green, filled with timber so tall it makes a Greenlander's mouth water. Others insist they're just drunken sailors' tales, told to make the bitter ale go down easier. You lean against the fire, listening to the sagas unfold, feeling the rhythm of the skald's voice. His words curl like smoke around the rafters, and you can almost picture them faraway shores where grapes tumble wild, rivers teem with fish, and grass grows so thick a cow could graze all winter. This isn't just a bedtime story for them. It's survival. Greenland, despite its name, is more ice than green, and every winter is a reminder that nature's patience is thin. Timber is scarce, crops are meager, and the settlers scrape by with trade, fishing, and sheer stubbornness. A rumor of better land to the west is like someone whispering about a secret pantry when your cupboards are bare. You probably laugh a little at the idea of Vikings, those horn-helmeted caricatures from cartoons treating rumors like lifelines. But here, there are no horns, no polished Hollywood warriors, just rough, scarred people. Their knuckles swollen from rowing, their beards stiff with salt, their voices coarse with cold air. Still, their curiosity is as sharp as the knives at their belts. If the sagas are even half true, then beyond Greenland lies a world less cruel. A place where ships don't splinter from storms every other week. And here's where history starts to blur with myth. The Greenland Saga and the saga of Eric the Red both whisper about these journeys, though they don't always agree on the details. One version says the land was first spotted by accident when a trader named Biodny got lost on his way to Greenland and stumbled across wooded shores. Another insists it was Eric, the Red's family, who carried the flame of discovery. Historians still argue whether those sagas are eyewitness accounts, polished legends, or some stew of both. It's like listening to your uncle tell the same fishing story every Christmas: bigger fish, stronger currents, more danger, yet somewhere inside the exaggeration, there's usually a sliver of truth. Norsemen sometimes measured sailing distances by how long it took to cook a sheep's head in a cauldron. Imagine timing your voyage not with clocks, but with how tender the cheek meat feels. That's navigation with flavor. You can almost hear the arguments. No, we're still 3 sheep heads away from land. Practical, gross, and somehow perfect. So there you are, curled in a flickering firelight, hearing these tales stretch across the room. You feel the pull both of hunger for resources and the thrill of stepping into the unknown. You don't yet know the names of those who will set sail, but the seed has been planted. Beyond the ice, there might be another world waiting. And while half the settlement scoffs, the other half wonders, what if? What if the sagas are true? 1. Who were the Vikings? The true Vikings' history is fascinating. Simply put, the Vikings were Norwegians, Swedes, and Danes, men who were usually farmers, traders, blacksmiths, and craftsmen. For various reasons, they took to raiding towns, churches, and monasteries. Many of the places they attacked were on the coasts, as they were easiest to reach. With their swift and easily landed ships, the Vikings could quickly swarm over the communities, killing and looting, and just as fast return to their ships and leave. They were gone before any defense or counterattack could be made. Strangely enough, for most of the men who went to Viking, it was only part-time. When a Viking wasn't busy farming, planting crops, for instance, they left their farms and went raiding. They often returned in time for harvest in the fall. Raiding was very profitable, however, and many farmers became full-time pirates and raiders. Vikings burst out of their homelands starting in the 8th century. They raided, fought, and settled in many parts of Europe and Russia. But they also took off on voyages of discovery across the Atlantic Ocean. They moved into Scotland and Ireland, and most of the Atlantic islands, Shetland, Orkney, and the Hebrides. Vikings soon settled in the Faroe Islands as well, and later discovered Iceland through a sailing mishap. Over the next 2 centuries, Viking explorers settled in Iceland, Greenland, and Vinland in what is now Newfoundland. When the quiet monks on the holy island of Lindisfarne saw the dragon ships approaching, they didn't know what was coming. They were fully unprepared for the ferocity of the warriors, armed with sword, axe, and shield. The attack and plunder of Lindisfarne, a rich and unprotected monastery, echoed throughout the next 300 years of European history. The Viking Age had begun. Historians use the term the Viking Age to describe the turbulent expansion of the Scandinavian people into Europe and Russia. Beginning in AD 793 with the Lindisfarne raid, Norwegians, Swedes, and Danes set to raiding. Any unprotected community was a target. Vikings attacked places all along the coasts of Scotland, England, Ireland, France, Italy, and inland Russia. They terrorized, plundered, traded, explored, and finally settled and farmed all over the lands they encountered. They made an enduring name for themselves in the 8th through the 11th centuries for being tactical warriors, smart traders, and daring explorers. In fact, they arrived in America 1,000 years before Columbus ever did. And archaeologists have found some of their remnants scattered as far east as Russia. While video games and movies tend to portray Vikings as ruthless savages with oversized helmets and hollow brains, their culture and motives reach far beyond that. The term Viking means pirate raid in the Old Norse language. The people of Scandinavia commonly used the word as a verb to describe a tradition where men would take off in the summers and go Viking. Contrary to popular belief, the majority of these expeditions did not consist of raiding villages and raping women. Instead, their purpose was usually to discover new land and trade. They even had a legal system. Catholic propaganda is responsible for most of the modern misconception about Vikings. They were pagans, not Christian. The church lost several facilities, treasures, and relics to Scandinavian people. So they made it their mission for many years to make them look like wild beasts. They didn't wear those cool horned helmets. Pretty much every single Viking costume you have seen in a movie or video game is a lie. These warriors usually went into battle airheaded. The whole horned helm idea came about in Victorian times when Vikings were romanticized. Painters began to depict them as glamorous savages with horned helmets. However, nothing found during the Viking Age shows this image to be in the least bit authentic. Norwegian Vikings first discovered Iceland. The first was Nadod, who was blown off course sailing from Norway to the Faroe Islands in 861. He called the new island Snowland. Nadod returned to Norway and told people of his discovery. 6 years later, Floki Vilgerdarson was the first Viking to set out for Iceland and find it. Floki gave the island its present name of Iceland. However, it wasn't until 870 that people arrived to settle in Iceland. When Harald Fairhair strong-armed Norway under his control, many people fled. Some settled in Scotland, Ireland, Orkneys, and Faroe Islands, and Iceland. A Norwegian chieftain, Ingolfur Arnason, brought his family to Iceland in 874. Settling on the southwest peninsula in a place he called Reykjavik, or Cove of Smoke. Many other families from Norway, Scotland, and Ireland followed. The Icelandic sagas and Landnobok, or Book of the Settlements, written 200 years later, describes the early settling of Iceland. For the next 60 years, settlers came and picked out arable land to farm. Icelanders discovered and settled in Greenland starting in the 980s. Eric the Red, an adventuresome and belligerent man, was exiled from Iceland for killing a man. During his 3-year exile, Eric explored the southwest coast of Greenland. When he returned to Iceland, he bragged of the good land he had found, calling it Greenland to attract settlers. Icelanders settled in 2 main areas, the eastern settlement and the western settlement. Farming was difficult, but settlers were able to raise livestock and enough grain to feed them. Greenland was able to export furs, wool, sheep, whale blubber, and walrus ivory. Due to the advance of the Little Ice Age, however, the colony declined during the 14th century. Life had become too hard, shipping too difficult due to growing ice. By 1408, all the settlers were gone. Vinland, North America. A trader named Bjarni Herjolfsson was sailing to Greenland. He was blown off course and sighted lands to the west. He successfully completed his journey to Greenland, where he described his accidental find to Leif Erikson, son of Eric the Red. Circa AD 1000, Leif and a crew sailed across 1,800 miles across open sea. Following Bjarni's description of his voyage, the Greenlanders made a small settlement in the land they called Vinland. Due to hostile natives that the Vikings called Skrælings, the settlement eventually failed. In the 1960s, a Norse settlement was found at Ansø Meadows in Newfoundland by an archaeologist, Anne Stein Ingstad, and her husband, Helge. Whether this is the Viking settlement mentioned in various sagas is still in dispute, but archaeology proves the Vikings discovered North America 500 years before Christopher Columbus. They buried their dead in boats. Vikings loved their boats, and the Scandinavian culture was extremely superstitious. It was considered a great honor for a person to be mummified, dressed in finery, and placed to rest in a ship. They believed that these ships would transcend the dead into the afterlife. Distinguished warriors and high-born women were often put to rest in vessels, surrounded by valuable goods and sacrificed slaves. They loved to keep themselves clean and tidy. Several Viking excavations have turned up razors, combs, tweezers, and even ear cleaners. It turns out these savage warriors cared quite a lot about their personal hygiene. Historians also believe that the typical Viking citizen bathed at least once a week, far more than any other European group during that time. They liked to ski for fun. Roughly 6,000 years ago, the Scandinavian people developed their own version of skis and used them for hunting, traveling, and entertainment. They even had a god of skiing who was named Older. Kings and high lords indulged in skiing for entertainment, and sometimes had competitions where the best skiers could win prizes. Viking women had basic rights. Vikings girls were usually forced to marry around the age of 12 and tend to a household full of kids, while their husbands sailed off into awesome adventures. However, when compared to other women during that time, they enjoyed a wide range of freedoms. They had the right to inherit property, file for a divorce, and even reclaim settlements if the marriage failed. They used urine to start fires. Vikings lived a large part of their lives on the go. Because they did not have lighters, they would collect a tree fungus called touchwood and boil it for several days in their own urine. After the mixture was done, they would pound it into a felt-like substance. The sodium nitrate found in the urine would mix with the touchwood and make the mixture easily combustible, so they could easily start a fire while on the road. They took part in human trafficking. Many Viking businessmen made small fortunes by capturing women and young men and then selling them in giant slave markets across the Middle East and Europe. These slaves were usually referred to as thralls and came from Celtic, Anglo-Saxon, and Slavic settlements raided by the Vikings. Viking men often dyed their hair during the Viking era. Having blonde hair was really in with the cool crowd. Therefore, brunette Vikings, mostly men, would use a heavily concentrated soap with high levels of lye that would bleach their hair. Historians believe that aside from being part of their culture's beauty ideal, the bleached hair would also help keep lice away. And now, with the waves settled and the fires dim, you let your mind loosen its grip. The arguments of historians fade into a soft background buzz, like the hum of insects on a summer night. You don't need to solve the puzzle of who was first or whose footsteps mattered most. Instead, you can just let the images drift gently. A sail catching the wind, a coastline rising out of the mist, a longhouse glowing with firelight, a circle of voices trading stories under the aurora. The air in your imagination is calmer now, warm